Today we're going to be in John chapter 6, looking at verses 16 through 21. Now, Jesus was and is a miracle worker. There are some miracles that Jesus accomplished that just bring awe and excitement to us when we hear about them. Today we are going to talk about one of those miracles. Now, John calls them signs. They are signs that Jesus accomplished to prove that He was the Son of God. Now, we don't need to get caught up in the sign. It's not necessarily the sign that's important, but it's what the sign points to. Jesus met a problem in each of the signs that He performed, and that is true for our scripture today. There is a problem, and Jesus does the miraculous to meet the needs of the people. The sign that John gives us today is the sign of Jesus walking on water. Now, don't misunderstand me. This isn't Randy Travis singing about his grandfather who he thought walked on water. This isn't Doc Holliday saying that Wyatt Earp walked on water in his gunfight with Curly Bill. No, this is real life. I believe with every fiber of my being that Jesus walked on water. Let's read verses 16 through 21. Now, when evening came, His disciples went down to the sea. And after getting into a boat, they started to cross the sea to Capernaum. It had already become dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. The sea began to be stirred up because a strong wind was blowing. Then when they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and drawing near to the boat, and they were frightened. But He said to them, "It is I, do not be afraid." So they were willing to receive Him into the boat, and immediately the boat was at the land to which they were going. What's the problem in this passage that Jesus met? Each time that Jesus did a miracle, He did so to meet someone's needs. In this passage, the disciples are in trouble, and they, just simply put it, they are afraid. Now, fear isn't a powerful emotion that everyone faces. In the book of Genesis, Adam's second recorded words are directed towards God. "I heard you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid." Adam was afraid. It's a natural emotion that all people face. It reminds me of a story. It reminds me of this story. One summer night during a severe thunderstorm, a mother was tucking her small son into the bed. She was about to turn off the light when he asked, in a very trembling voice because of the thunderstorm, "Mommy, will you stay with me all night?" And smiling, the mother gave him a big hug and said tenderly, "I can't, honey. I have to sleep in Daddy's room." There was a long silence, and after just a few moments, the little boy spoke and he said, "Well, he's a big baby." I'm not sure if the dad was really afraid of the storm or not. That little boy thought his dad was afraid of the storm, but everyone faces fears. If you want to see terror in someone's face, just let me ask them to come sit in this chair and talk to an unknown people, a faceless group of people out in Facebook and internet land, and you will see fear come over their face. Today, as you hear this message, I hope that you'll contemplate your life, and that you should know that Jesus can calm all of your fears that you have. He's there for you, and we are living in a fearful time right now. And many people are afraid to go out of their homes, to go and get the most simplest and the most basic of needs that they have. They're afraid. So what can we learn from this passage? First, when we go without Jesus, we should expect fear. In verses 16 and 17, we read this. Now when evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, and after getting into a boat, they started to cross the sea to Capernaum, and it had already become dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. From the way I see it, there are two ways that we get ahead of God. We get ahead of God by our own design, and sometimes we get ahead of God by His design as a way of testing us. Our passage in John doesn't tell us this, but the parallel passages in Matthew and Mark do tell us that Jesus compelled them to get into the boat. So Jesus made them get into the boat, and as they rowed across the Sea of Galilee, they were met with a storm. And we are told it was a great storm, one that caused them to work and to toil all night, and they had only made it about halfway across the sea. Now you understand why John has said to them that darkness had come. Not only was John talking about the physical darkness around them, that there was no light, but darkness and fear had overcome them as well. Now, some of you are probably wondering why I think that Jesus is testing them. I believe it's because they've already been in this position before. If you study the life of Jesus, then you know that there was an instance already where the disciples were in the exact same situation. I alluded to it earlier. It was when Jesus was asleep in the stern of the boat, and when they come, they awake, and Jesus saves them from the tempest. But here's what we have to understand. Jesus in both times told the disciples, "Let us go over to the other side." And what we have to learn is that Jesus means what He says. We have to learn to trust Jesus in what He says as well. Now, sometimes our getting ahead of God is by His own design. We are in a place where He wants us to be. And there are other times where we get ahead of God. The Bible is filled with examples of people who got ahead of God, and it turned out terrible for them. Abraham and Sarah were to have a child, and it was to be a great nation. Year after year came, and year after year went, but they still had no child. They took matters into their own hand, and Sarah gave Hagar to Abraham, and she conceived and gave birth to Ishmael. Then Sarah conceived as promised, and she gave birth to Isaac. And to this day, the descendants of Isaac and Ishmael feud and fight. Moses wanted to deliver the Israelites from the bondage of slavery, but he killed an Egyptian and fled to the desert and had to wait 40 years before God would consecrate him again to do what He had called him to do. David wanted to bring the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem, and he sent some people out to get it, and Uzzah had to die because he had gotten too hasty and got ahead of God. See, there are just a few biblical examples of people getting ahead of God, but I know in the times of my life when I have been at my lowest, or it seems that God is at His farthest away from me, it's because I've gotten ahead of God. Now, as we talk about fear that comes from going without Jesus, we have to discuss the elephant in the room. Now, you can't see the room that I'm in. There's not an elephant. I promise there's not. But one of the greatest fears that a person has is the fear of death. Death is the one thing that we can all be certain of. One day, my body will die and I will lie in the ground somewhere. Without Jesus, there is fear in death. There is fear of the unknown. There is fear of not knowing where a person will go. When I was pastoring at a previous church, a woman had went to see one of her friends like she did almost every day. But one day was different. She got there to her friend's house, and in the process of talking with her friend, something happened, and literally her friend died in her arms. This lady was just struck with fear about death. I mean, fear and terror overtook her life. She couldn't leave the house. She couldn't leave her bed. She was terrified that death was after her. But I've got news for you. Death is after every single one of us. But you don't have to be afraid of death, for Jesus came to take away death. And more importantly, I would say He came to take away our fear of death. And if I'm being honest with you, I'm not worried about death. I'm just concerned about those few moments between living and dead. It's that part we call dying. Now, there's a lot of different ways that I would like to go, and there are a lot of different ways that I would not want to go. I mean, I would rather die in my sleep than drown. I would rather die by a massive heart attack than be burned alive. But as I heard one preacher say, most people die with their shoes on. And basically that means we don't have a choice in the way that we die. But we better be ready when that time comes. My grandfather was a pastor. He died when a lawnmower fell on him when he was working on it. Years ago, I heard about a couple who had just gotten married, and as they were leaving from the ceremony, a tree fell on the vehicle and killed them both. I don't know how I will die. I don't know when I will die, but I do know that Jesus is in the boat with me, and I have nothing to fear. See, with Jesus, the fear of death is removed. And secondly, I would say that Jesus is the answer to the storm in your life. See, the disciples were in a storm. Now, this was not a metaphorical storm. This storm was real. It was a real storm. It had real wind, real waves, real danger, and real death that was awaiting the disciples. In Matthew and Mark, they record that Jesus got into the boat and the winds and the waves ceased. In my mind's eye, when I think about this, I can see the Sea of Galilee turning into glass, and the moon's reflection and the cliffs above could be seen in the water like it was a mirror. Even though this was a real storm that the disciples faced, I believe there is a principle here for us to learn as well. God can calm the storms in our life. No matter the storm that we are going through, God can calm and bring peace to our life. See, there are real storms that we must go through. There are tornadoes and hurricanes and ice storms and the occasional snowstorm for us. There are real storms, and Jesus is the master of the wind and the waves. But not only can He calm those storms, with Jesus, He can calm the other storms in our life as well. See, when the storm of marital discord plucks your life, Jesus can bring resounding quietness and stillness. When the storm of financial insecurity shakes like an earthquake, Jesus can bring stability to your life. When the storm of relational problems shower you and beat you like hail from the dark skies above, Jesus is there to calm your storm. When a small virus takes control of the world, Jesus is there to remind us that He's in full control. Do you hear what I'm telling you right now? Whatever you may be going through, it can be better with Jesus. Now, some of you may hear and think that I'm telling you everything and all of your problems are going to be solved. That's not accurate, and please don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying that if you trust Jesus that your marriage will be saved. I'm not saying that with Jesus your house won't be foreclosed. I'm not saying with Jesus that your children and grandchildren will respect you and love you. But what I am saying is that with Jesus, there is comfort and peace to help you along. He makes all of those issues bearable. So I'm not sure where you are today. Metaphorically speaking, are you on the beach waiting to get into the boat? Are you in the middle of the sea waiting for Christ to show up? Or are you sailing on the placid waters with Him? So no matter where you are, I can say this: Jesus is there for you. He's not a life jacket for you to put on and to take off whenever you feel like you need Him. He's the commander. He's the commander of the wind, the waves, and the ship. He is the commander for Him to control your life. And for Him to control your life, you have to give up control. And so my question for you today is this: will you trust Him? And will you trust Him with everything that is going on right now in your life?